Hi, I'm Meredith Walsh. This is Harrison Herndon, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast. And we are just hours after a Lando win at Miami. Can we believe it?
First
Can we believe
Lando
it?
win. Congratulations to
First
Lando.
Lando win over Verstappen. He was able to finish the race, which is, something that's important when we're talking about beating Max Verstappen. But like I mentioned, we're P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast. And I think, Harrison, we should jump in where everyone is waiting for our insight, which would be P10, Esteban Ocon. Let's
P10,
go,
Esteban Ocon.
Alpine.
I mean, in a way, I think we called this. I think after
We did.
after spring qualifying, we knew that Alpine was going to be strong. When
Mhm.
I saw, what was it, Gasly, that was only 3/10 behind the Mercedes through Sector 2 in sprint qualifying, I knew that we were up to something, especially because, they were on, this was actually FP1. They were on representative tires. They were both on the soft tire at the same time. And I could
Yeah.
see, and I kind of had an insight at that point that, hey, Alpine is stronger than we've seen in the past. I think part of this is brought on by the fact that Alpine is finally at the right weight. They've been overweight. They were as much as 20 pounds. The car was 20 pounds overweight to start the season. That's going to rob you of lap time. And when we really think about where Alpine is, part of this, where we have a lot of insight, and part of where P1 Picks, I think, is really, really going to provide some insight is on the development battle, right? What teams are bringing developments.
Yeah.
And Alpine brought a good development this week to take the car to the right weight. We know that saving weight is the best way to get lap time, and they're doing that right now. So Alpine are strong. I think Alpine are going to be a stronger midfield team going forward. I think you look at tracks like Monaco, you look at tracks like Singapore, where downforce is really important, where engine doesn't necessarily matter as much. Alpine are going to be there. I think that's definitely one of the insights to take for the season is Alpine are back.
Yeah, okay. And Alpine is back. That was not what I was expecting to talk about today. But no, really, it was a cool thing outside of them battling each other, which I feel like will happen until the end of time. We have all seen that relationship and what that looks like. But if we're talking about the teams that are battling after, the main teams that we watch battle every week at the top of the field, I think it's really cool that Alpine has come to develop. It's been a little bit, I would say, underreported. I haven't seen too much about it, but really excited for that development. And if we are talking about betting value, which is what we are trying to give you, trust me, I listen to all the other Formula One podcasts. I love them so dearly. I love talking about all of the newsworthy things. But when we talk about betting value, Harrison, why do we think Alpine is where we're going to put quite a bit of money this season going forward?
I think Alpine, Monaco are going to be strong. I think outliers where tracks where we know horsepower doesn't really matter, we should look for Alpine to be strong. And I think on the reverse side, on the flip side of the coin, tracks like Monza, where we know horsepower really does matter, we should maybe not be looking at Alpine to be so strong. And so I think, Alpine really struggled to start the season, and I think Vegas books like to look at historical performance. Just because Alpine was poor previously doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be poor in the future. They have good engineers. They have good drivers. They were a solid midfield team last year. I mean, 3 years ago, they were fighting for P4. Alpine is a strong team. They know what to do. I think they might have made a step back by firing Omar last year, but they're starting to get that team in the right play. They got a new technical director. They're still going to struggle because that engine is down on horsepower, and we know that. But I don't think they're necessarily always going to be at the back of the grid. I think teams that are going to be at the back of the grid, if we're going to have this conversation, Williams. Williams struggled. Williams struggled this week.
Not my heart.
They were stronger in the sprint qualifying, and I think one of the things to kind of dive into is sprint qualifying is going to be an anomaly, right? The fact that teams are able to start on the soft tire, where no team started the race on the soft tire, right? In the Grand Prix, everyone started on the medium and the hard because they were all planning to do one stop. In the sprint qualifying, you have Logan Sargent starting in P12 on the soft tire. Like, that's a joke. They're only just trying to keep the soft long enough to get points. In reality, that's so different than the strategy that you need to have going into a Formula One Grand Prix where you're not going to use the soft tire because what are you going to do, 2 stops? No one does 2 stops in Miami.
Right. Well, and let's circle back to I think one of the biggest takeaways from this weekend and this following sprint in China where we saw, gosh, I think consistency would be the last word I would use to describe the results you see from sprint qualifying to regular qualifying. This is the second week in a row that we have seen someone finish top 4 on a sprint race and then qualify following day at the bottom of the pack with Ricardo. And trust me, I was thrilled with the sprint performance of Danny Rick, but it's not translating over to regular qualifying. And I think you make a really good point. We're talking about different tire strategies. And I think moving forward, if we're going to look at value, previous week we had Lewis finishing P2 in a sprint race and coming out hours later and qualifying P18. So, what does that say? I think what it says is that if we're talking about sprint qualifying or we're talking about these sprint races, that is a different barometer than we're going to need to look at for traditional qualifying, where it is just, obviously longer race, different strategy. And I guess what would be consistent is there is not consistency yet when it comes to figuring out these sprint times.
There will be more surprises on sprint weekends. I think we saw in China. I think we saw in Miami. Sprint qualifying, sprint races have the opportunity to really switch things up because some of the top teams are going to focus on that. Ferrari is not going to focus on sprint race pace on the soft tire, right? They're looking at the medium. They're looking at the hard. They're looking, how do we beat Max on Sunday? Max doesn't really have to worry about this because he has the car, right? He's always going to potentially be P1. We're not going to talk about today the virtual safety car, but Max should always be P1.
And we will get to Max, the virtual safety car, and all that entails. But I think you're right. I think that the other part of this too is looking at where Lando finished and his commentary after finishing in the sprint race, and even Zach Brown's commentary to that point, where it's not that many points. We'll figure it out. What's important is tomorrow. And I feel like that kind of held true in this race where, well, yes, for viewers, and I know not everyone loves the sprint format, but I think for most people, just if you're talking outside of the historical context of what this means for racing in general, I think it's more fun to watch a sprint qualifying sprint race as opposed to practice sessions. However,
it's cool that we get another session, and I think there should be discussions maybe about it doing this for every race, right? We get another session, we get another opportunity to come at you for P1 picks, and the races are going to be such a different dynamic because there's no pit stops. And I think the no pit stop Formula One race is such a big deal because you're not necessarily driving for one stint. You're driving on 2 tires and you're trying to get the car to work on both a medium and a hard tire, right? You need a compromise. In a sprint race, you don't need a compromise. You just need the soft tire to last you 19 laps and you're through, right? And so the calculus is different. For teams like Williams, for teams like Sauber that don't have points yet, I see them being just hyper aggressive, right? Qualify well, put on the soft tire, hold everybody back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Survive for 19 laps.
Yeah, I agree. And, too, going back to kind of difference in performance between a sprint race and a regular race, if we want to talk about VCARB and Yuki, I think we can kind of pivot to now. Let's actually talk about this race. And I promise we will get into the Lando and Verstappen of it all and the Ferrari of it all. But let's highlight some of these back of the points finishers. Yuki up to P8 ahead of George Russell. I mean, really, it was phenomenal in terms of a showing for VCARB this weekend overall.
Yeah, I think Yuki is my driver of the day.
Okay.
Hot take. Yuki's my driver of the day. I think he didn't necessarily have the car to be in the points. I think Yuki drove a fantastic race. He drove clean, no mistakes, no lockups. Finishing in front of a Mercedes is a very big deal for a VCARB. I think, in a way, cars struggled to overtake in Miami. I don't think the DRS zone was long enough. Look at Piastri and Sainz, right? Sainz was never really able to get past Piastri when it looked like he really did have the faster car for a lot of that stint.
Yeah.
So I think we need to talk about Miami as one of those tracks where track position really, really matters. I think as we look forward to next year, track position is going to be super important for where you qualify. And Yuki did it right. He qualified P9. He moved up in the race. That's the Yuki that I'm very surprised to see is now a full, well-rounded, mature driver who doesn't make mistakes. Yuki used to be very hot-headed. Yuki used to go off track once a lap. Once a race. Yuki has pulled it together, and I think there's going to be a lot of betting value as we roll over to Imola looking at Yuki and the points. I like that bet a lot. I think V-carb is going to be strong in a race like Imola, where you need a lot of downforce, you need a lot of confidence in the car, a lot of change of direction needs to be strong. I see V-carb in the points in
All
Imola.
right, so I'm going to give you two options of where you want to pivot because I think both of
Yep.
these are V-carb related.
Okay.
So we can talk about V-carb as opposed to Mercedes and the
Okay.
upgrades, and I put that in heavy quotations,
Yep.
that we were told was coming to Miami. So we can go that
Yep.
path, or we can go V-carb and Sergio Perez. I know that's like a little bit of a broader correlation, but if we're talking about that performance today and where
Yep.
Perez finished, it kind of feels eerie as if we're talking about 2023, when that confidence, and not to be body language doctor or like head doctor of trying to figure out, what's going on team dynamic wise, but
Yep.
a finish like Danny Ricks in P4, a finish like P8 for Yuki,
Yep.
I feel like keeps that door open in a way that is starting to be reflected on the track. So I'll give you
Yeah.
Mercedes or I'll give you Red Bull. Which way do you want to go?
In a way, let's talk Sergio Perez, because I think
Okay.
Sergio Perez had his worst race of the season.
Yeah,
Perez was
I agree.
fighting with Lewis Hamilton for P6, P7. Like, what are you doing, man? You're in potentially the fastest car on the grid. And really, my what are you doing Perez moment is he is a foot away from him running into Max.
I think a foot is
If he
generous.
takes
I think
out
a
both
foot is
cars,
generous.
he's
Yeah.
gone. And in a way, how much pressure was Sergio under today to stay in P2? Let me back up. Sergio needs to do one thing. Come in P2 and win when Max isn't around. And he did not do that today. And I think
Yeah.
when you don't do that, you're under pressure at a car that is still the fastest car on the grid. So I think Sergio's
Yeah.
under pressure. I think Sergio's under pressure because Sainz is out there. And I think a lot of teams would rather have Sainz than have Perez. Perez is great. Sainz is better.
Well, and let's talk about the signs of it all. I feel
Okay.
like, in addition to Danny Rick, to Tsunoda, who are in that Red Bull, program and could very
Right.
well be a replacement. And because that door hasn't been completely shut, I think the other part of this is that Sainz is doing brilliant in terms of what his future is going to look like, because it would have been very easy for him to be the premier Audi driver, to be in that spot where he's taking the money and running. But you cannot refute his performance week after week after week. And who do they want in that car? Because if Perez is consistently, like you said, we are millimeters away from Perez dive bombing and taking out the top 4 in this race. So you have to feel a little bit, I think, for Perez. I think it is a position that is probably very thankless, but when we're talking about potentially ending races for Max, which is really the bottom line of all of this, and you've got someone like Sainz out there who I think at this point would be willing to take less money to be competitive. He is a competitor. I love Carlos Sainz. I've always loved Carlos Sainz. I think his performance this year, put him in the Red Bull. Put him in the Red Bull. Do it. I want that to happen.
Let's have a betting conversation about Sainz. Sainz,
Okay.
Lando,
Love it.
and Charles are all even. We're all even going into the podium in
Yeah.
Miami. 2 of those 3 finished on the podium. Who didn't?
Yeah.
Sainz didn't. I think Sainz, great. He started the year off so strong, right? 3 podiums to start the first 3 races. And ever since that, Charles is back. I think there's betting value here. I think the books are still thinking that Sainz and Charles are even. I think after watching Miami, I think Charles has moved ahead. The fact that he had 10 minutes of practice and could the car P2, I'm telling you, Leclerc's strong right now.
But do you feel like, if we're betting purposes, Harrison, and I think
Yep.
this might be where we are really plugging into practice session 1, practice session 2, all of the variables that go into qualifying, because I think qualifying is a really interesting place when we're talking about the Ferrari. I think that is probably, more so than any other team watching them in practice sessions, I kind of always feel like I know who's going to qualify ahead. Typically that is Charles, right?
Yeah.
But I think if we're talking, I don't think that Charles is that much ahead of Sainz to where if the odds lay out where Sainz is an equal competitor, I'm putting my money there. I think that his showing this year has been really impressive. He has nothing and everything to drive for essentially at this point, right?
Yep.
And I think if Charles is going to have these odds that are, where the value just isn't quite as much there, I don't think you're losing a ton of ground putting money on Carlos in those situations.
No, I think Charles is the prodigy, man. I think Charles is just one of those. I mean, of the
Okay,
four
I
drivers that came
agree.
out of the quad, right? You think about Lando
Yeah.
Norris, you think about George Russell, you think about Charles, you think about Albon. I'm telling you, Charles is the strongest one. And the reason I'll say that is I think the best Formula 2 season of any driver ever, even better than Lewis Hamilton, Charles.
Yeah.
Charles wins the sprint race in Formula 2, the very first race. He makes a pit stop. He puts on the soft tire. There's 16 laps to go in Bahrain. He gets it done. We will, at the end of this podcast, we are going to link to that because I'm telling you, at that moment, I realized Charles and Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are the three strongest drivers on the grid. Sure,
I
Sainz is
okay.
great. He's
Yeah.
he's he's super talented, but he's going against Superman.
I I understand 1,000% what you're saying. I will say though, if there's a betting advantage, I don't think that it's that far off in
Yeah.
these races. We've seen, I mean, Sainz, let's face it, the appendix race, he was out and he's
Yep.
still not too far behind Charles.
You're right. The
And
appendix race was strong. He was
I
strong in
know.
Australia to win the race.
But here's the
I
other
agree.
part of this conversation that I really love for us, Harrison, because I think it gives a fantastic insight to who we are as race watchers and Formula One fans, which is something that I love and why you and I have done this,
Over here.
without the cameras for, gosh, over a year now, just talking Formula One all the time. I am one of those newbie fans who my first season was 2021. And there are things that, in the way I think about Ferrari, which are very different than the historical thinking of Ferrari in terms of like, to me, they mess up. To me, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, so seeing all of this go so well for strategy, I don't know a Ferrari that is different than that. Echoing to that, the race that you're talking about, Formula 2 with Charles, well, yes, I know that he was good in that. It's really fun to kind of understand the backstories of these drivers. The quad is my favorite TikTok deep dive. I'll start there. I think they're so fun as a group. But
Yeah.
I would love to know a little bit more about why you feel these way and why these are your opinions outside of the Formula One that I've known, which has been very different than the historical context
My
of
one
Formula One.
piece to all Formula One watchers would be watch Formula 2. And
Yeah.
I think drivers that you see that consistency. I don't want to say that. You see the same principles carry over, right?
Mhm.
Charles was a fantastic qualifier in F2. That trend definitely carried over. You looked at George Russell. I mean, I think George Russell during his FP2 days was stronger. I mean, he won FP over Lando, which was
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, the surprise here was that Lando really struggled in F2.
Yeah.
Lando came out and said I wasn't strong enough. There wasn't power steering and I just didn't have the strength to do it. Except Lando Norris won the first race of the season by 7 seconds, and that really put him on the map.
Yeah.
The reason I also tell people to watch Formula 2 is Kimi Antonelli is coming. If you haven't heard this name, start to listen now. He's
Yeah.
obviously being touted as the next Verstappen. So, there's a lot of BS that can come from that. But I've heard the test at Imola was amazing. I've heard his
Great.
test at Imola, he did 18 laps, 19 laps on a medium tire in the W13. From his first lap to his 17th lap within 3/100ths of a second, 3/1000ths of a second, right? So that level of consistency on his first
Yeah.
time in a Formula One car is really going to turn eyes. It's turned enough heads that there's rumors of a private test next week with him and Mick Schumacher in the same car. So Mercedes are really doing their homework to try to figure out, is Kimi going to be put in the Mercedes seat? Is he going to sit in the Williams seat and replace Logan? We don't know, but I'm telling you, the next kid to watch, and the reason to watch Formula 2, if you really want to look at betting value, is look at Kimi. Is he stronger over one lap? Is he stronger in the race? What does he look like in the wet? What does he look like on new tires, right? Does he push too hard? Those are all
Yeah.
things that we can learn now, and we can turn this into betting value when we get to Australia for next year.
Yeah, I'm thrilled by that. I think the other part of this too that's going to make this fun for people who, might be newer to Formula One or also like me, newer to betting.
Yeah.
I I love Formula One and I love, like I said, I think when we introduced this podcast, we said we're data analysts by trade. So I want the science behind why these cars do what they do. But I also am a little bit more tied to the emotional side. Like to me, Carlos has something to prove.
Yeah.
So that gives them an edge where the data might not necessarily give us that, right? So I think it's a really cool balance between you and I, just in terms of what we're looking at in these races and how that's going to work into these tracks that you have a little bit more of a historical context with and how they perform. I
And I think the
think we
one thing
would.
that no, go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead.
No, please.
Oh, I'm about to change the subject to McLaren.
I'm
So if
about to
you want to
change the
finish
subject to
here.
Ferrari.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Let's go. We'll just leave the best for last.
Okay.
At least the best in Miami, and that was McLaren. But tell me about Ferrari because this is something I do want to
So,
talk about as well.
I love the Ferrari rumors and upgrades, right? Nothing stays private in Ferrari is my favorite thing about that organization. I hear
Yeah.
the Evo, the upgraded Ferrari, is a whole new car. New floor. I hear a new front wing. I mean, in the same way that McLaren brought a pretty large update, I've heard that the Ferrari update has actually been ready, but they didn't want to roll it out in Miami because they were worried about setup. Imola with 3 practice sessions.
Yeah.
I'd expect Sainz and Charles to start on very different setups and maybe move as the time gets closer over to qualifying. But I expect an upgraded Ferrari to be really strong. Charles was, what, 100th of a thousandth, a tenth behind Max in qualifying? He
It
could
wasn't
be on
much.
pole in Imola. I don't think that he'll win the race. I think that there's still questions over total amount of downforce. Can they get the tire to work over a full stint better than Red Bull? I don't know. We haven't really seen that. But I do like Charles over 1 lap. I do like
Mm-hmm.
Charles in an upgraded Ferrari over 1 lap. But I'm
Yeah.
also afraid that this might be a case of the Empire Strikes Back. This is the first
Go.
time. I think Red Bull is more under threat now than in Singapore 2023. Singapore 2023, Max already had the championship strewn up, right? He had already won.
Yeah.
This is the first time someone is driven away from him in a race since 2022.
Not only that, and again, this is where I'm a little less analytical and a little more ear to the ground in terms of what's going on. Chaos. I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot talk about this Red Bull season without there just being things that he has not had to worry about the last few years.
Yeah.
Every week, it is like freaking days of our lives, I feel like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it feels like Max, and the amount of love as a Lewis Hamilton fan, as coming into the sport as a Lewis Hamilton, the amount of love, respect, and just jaw-dropping awe that I feel for Max Verstappen over the last few seasons is really something I never thought I would get to. However, you can't be in turmoil all the time and have it not affect you a little bit, right? And I feel like there are parts of the last few months at this point. We're talking months. We're not talking a week. We're not talking like a week-long thing. There has been rumor after just a lot. Not to mention, I think if we're talking partner pairings, third, maybe. I think that for sure we're talking Ferrari is the number one. That would be my point. I think McLaren is right up there. I feel like I almost trust Oscar as much as I do Perez at this point, especially if we're in a Perez downward spiral like we saw last year. Possibly, kind of feels like a possibility. That's a little bit of fighting with one hand behind your back. And so I think you're absolutely right. If we're talking about real threat, like real absolute threat, this year and this upcoming race and these potential upgrades that these cars are making, I think we might have a little bit more diversity in terms of finishing and qualifying in areas where we can find some lines and find some data and hopefully give you guys good insight on who to put money on for the week.
I'm excited to see these lines in Imola open up tomorrow. I'm telling you, everyone is going to love Lando, and really the betting value is going to be Max is going to win. I mean, Max to win in Miami was like minus 500. I'm sure he's going to be like minus 300. That's a great bet, right? I already love Max to win. I already think Ferrari's going to be strong. Maybe Charles to qualify on pole. I could see that. Um,
Yeah.
you know, sure, McLaren and Lando are going to be strong. Are they going to be on the podium? I don't know.
Are they the
Do I think
value
Ferrari
though?
are going to be
Is
on the
that
podium? Yeah, absolutely.
it is Lando the value pick though? And that's probably not fair.
I mean, well, yes, but also we have a way of looking at historical data and overanalyzing it. I mean, McLaren are going
Right.
to be strong. They brought a good upgrade. The car's fast. They've got a lot of confidence in that team now. So, yeah, they should be fighting with Ferrari. I mean, I still think they're the third fastest team. I still think with the
Yeah.
updates, Ferrari jumps ahead, and it's still Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren. I think we called it
Yeah.
right this week when we knew that McLaren upgrade was good. But let's also note the virtual safety car did not last a full lap. It's the first
Oh,
race
oh
in
wait, we have to get
2016.
in. Let's bridge
Yeah,
this gap, Harrison. I
yeah,
know this is literally, I think, the first thing that you texted me after the race that was like, we need to be paying attention to this thing, and I have not heard it yet.
yes,
So let's dive into McLaren and let's talk about this anomaly that was the virtual safety car. Tell me
yes.
more, tell me everything.
So I think this is for all the people that bet on Max to win, I still think that was fundamentally the right bet. The
Yeah.
virtual safety car means that most virtual safety cars are 2 laps, right? Everyone gets the opportunity to pit because everybody's slowed down to a certain lap time. So you are going to save time in the pit stop. Because the virtual safety car was less than a lap, certain cars had the opportunity to pit, like Yuki, and certain cars didn't have the opportunity to pit under the virtual safety car, like Max. What's funny about this is that by Max hitting the bollard, he kind of lost himself the race because by hitting the bollard, he brought out the virtual safety car. You could argue by bringing out the virtual safety car, it led to the full safety car, and thus he was in a position to lose the race. Now, could he have predicted that a virtual safety car was going to come out if he hit a bollard? Probably. Could he have predicted the time the virtual safety car came out and that it would so penalize and hurt Max going forward? I think the other piece is, had this been Charles, we would have seen a very different Max. He knows his fight is with the Ferraris for the season. He has to beat 3 people. He has to beat Perez and he has to beat the 2 Ferraris. The McLaren is not a real challenger. They're not a real threat to the title. Are
Okay.
they going to win potentially the occasional race because they've got a really strong car and they've made some really great aero updates to get to the front of the grid? Absolutely. Is Lando
Great.
Norris a threat to the championship? No, he's not. Max is still going to run away with it.
All right. So
Yeah.
I think what we're leaning towards here, going with what this race was,
Yep.
is that we might give an over importance to the McLaren win, and
Yep.
that could be reflected in betting odds next week.
Yep.
We also need to talk about the real threat to Verstappen. And I think
Yep.
when we're talking about Red Bull success, we're talking about Verstappen.
Yeah, we are.
That's kind
I
of
mean,
where we're
he's
at.
the one out front. He's the one to put money on. I think what's
Right.
going to be interesting tomorrow is to start to look at those lines, right? I like Max
Yeah.
to win. I like Charles to podium. I like that really
Yeah.
early. You know,
Well, and I
I think
think
when you
just
find
to
value there, hit it.
Yeah, I think just to give you guys a little bit of a layout of what the week looks like for us going into Imola and potential. So we're gonna have email where you can subscribe here through YouTube, and we will send out an email of our 3 picks of the week. That will traditionally be something we see a lot of value in, something that feels comfortable, but that we should still look to as a pretty solid bet. And then our P10 of the week, which will be an every week bet. It is in honor of the Dallas Fort Worth Formula One Breakfast Club, which we have been going to for many, many races. And I believe I'm actually in Brooklyn right now, so I didn't get to go today. But Harrison, just like recap a little bit, and then we're going to let you guys go.
500
What the
people at a
Dallas Fort
Formula
Worth
One
Club?
event in Texas
Yeah,
Live.
go
So,
for it.
you know,
Texas Live.
Texas Live had a Formula One event sponsored by the Red Bull Watch Party. They had an RB19 out there. It wasn't a real RB19. I just want to, I appreciate
Really?
that Red Bull brings a show car and allows people to see a Formula One car up close.
Yeah.
But once you see the detail on a real Formula One car, shout out Alfa Romero for always bringing the Formula One car to Coda. Even though you guys aren't a Formula One team, I still appreciate that. Yeah, and so I think it's great. I think the Formula One community in the United States is growing exponentially, right? I remember being a Formula One fan in, this was 2013 when there was the first year at Coda, right? I think Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull won. So, right, 11 years later, still seeing a dominant Red Bull. But the way the sport has grown, right? The amount of
Yeah.
Gen Z that we see wearing Formula One and McLaren gear is great. And the way that gamification of betting is going this is really awesome.
Yeah.
The last
Well, it
piece I'll
makes it
call out
fun.
is Grid Rivals. You know,
Yes.
great betting
Call it out.
platform, was able to get some fantastic Alpine picks. So you guys download Grid Rivals because we will be shouting them out and giving a Grid Rival pick and a Prize Picks pick every week to our premium subscribers.
Yeah,
99 cents.
absolutely. And as to mention, just to call back real quick, I didn't even know what Grid Rivals was. So I'm right there with
Yeah,
all of you who
they are one of the
are
new kind of
learning.
betting apps that I saw this
Yeah.
weekend that sent me hey, download this app and get a free $20. And I was like, absolutely. Turned that 20 into another 20, and I was able to bet Ocon to finish within 9.5 places of Piastri in the sprint, and
Mm-hmm.
Lewis to finish within 8.5 places of Gasly. And I
Gaslit, right.
loved the Gasly Hamilton bet because I knew they were going to be close. After I saw how close they were in FP1, I was a little stressed about the Ocon bet because he had a 4-place penalty for running into someone in the pit lane, which was absolutely terrible. But shout out Lewis Hamilton for getting a 20-second speeding in the pit lane penalty that dropped him behind Ocon and gave me $120, 3x my money. Thank you, Grid
Love that for
Rivals.
you. Thank you, Grid Rivals. And I
Thank you,
love
Grid
this for all
Rivals.
of us who are new at betting and know nothing and will learn with you all, and who are very seasoned professional, really been in the weeds with the betting for a while, which is you, Harrison. So it's going to be fun. We definitely have something here for everyone. We will be coming to you with those 3 free picks within our email. We'll also probably post a few more times with just some things that we're seeing based on data, a few Harrison only short clips to kind of give you an edge going into the weekend. And we're so thrilled that we're doing this. Find us on the socials. Thank you so much for listening to our post Miami Grand Prix podcast. We look forward to talking to you guys again later in the week. Like and subscribe.